everyone. I'm Felicity Broennan with AlgaePlanet.com with another installment of our original Women of Algae series. Today, we have two international seaweed specialists joining us for another insightful conversation on the future of seaweed farming. With us are Dr. Anicia Hurtado from the Philippines and Dr. Phaik-Eem Lim from Malaysia. Thank you both for being with us today. So, Dr. Lim, I'm going to start with you. Dr. Lim is the Deputy Director of the Institute of Ocean and Earth Sciences at the University of Malaya. She is one of the founding members and current Secretary of the Consortium of Southeast Asian Seaweed Taxonomy. Her main research focus has been on algae since the 1990s. Dr. Lim, what are you discovering as you explore diseases and pests associated with seaweed farming?
Okay, so as regard about the diseases, pests and diseases in seaweeds, actually we are at a very brief in terms of understanding. We do not have much information. So we know that the seaweed that we are cultivated, which is Kappa ficus and Eucheuma, they do have disease which people call it as ice because the appearance look like ice because it's a whitening color. But in terms of the mechanism, there is no definite, we have yet to reach the definite what are the main causes. But based on our experience and research, we will say that ice is mostly triggered due to the stress that is experiencing by the seaweed, such as when the weather condition is not good or their external growing environment is not favorable. So they will experience such a disease. So as true global seaweed star, actually, despite that the project ended in 2021, but the thing is because due to the pandemic, there's delay in terms of the analysis of the data. So we are hoping that together, the work together with the Natural History Museum, Scottish Association of Marine Sciences, as well as with Philippines and Tanzania, the work that we have done, we are able, through the microbiome, that we are able to look into what are the potential or possible group of microorganisms that might trigger, that might contribute to the disease, to this Kappa ficus and Eucheuma. Yeah. We need to take a proactive approach in order to understand more, because if you look into the cultivation of Kappa ficus and Eucheuma, it started in 1950 and mainly concentrated on the Southeast Asia regions and the tropical region. So in terms of science, in terms of we still need we need to develop more to look into details. So our involvement in the Global Seaweed Star is quite timely, that to help us to look into these various aspects that is very important to increase the productivity of the seaweed.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Hurtado is currently working in the Philippines and is the chair of the Integrated Services for the Development of Aquaculture and Fisheries. She finished her Doctor of Agriculture in Phycology at Kyoto University in Japan. She's the lead editor of the book Tropical Seaweed Farming Trends and has worked closely with seaweed farmers as a consultant for international funding agencies in the pursuit of sustainable seaweed farming. Dr. Hurtado, seaweed is going through a global renaissance, and I'm wondering, are there seaweed farming trends in Southeast Asia that you've observed that could be valuable to people in the other parts of the world?
There is now a new trend in seaweed research, because temperate countries like Australia, Ireland, Norway are looking into other seaweeds which are also found in their countries. One example is the Asparagopsis. The Asparagopsis taxiformis and the Armata. The taxiformis is native to tropical countries, wherein the Armata is native also to the temperate. So they are now looking into this Australia and even Western Europe are now looking into the importance of this seaweed, mainly because of the importance of this seaweed as a feed to cattle, to ruminant animals, because it will reduce the methane production that will cause carbon dioxide excess in the atmosphere. We have just started here in the Philippines, to be honest. We are now a government research institution is now in collaboration with Australian company, a private company, and we have not touched yet on the Western Europe. So that's asparagopsis. So that's very important now to them. Another very significant seaweed that is common to both the tropical and the temperate is the ulva. The ulva, which comes in many species. It's also a tropical one in the Philippines. In fact, the Philippines has been exporting this kind of seaweed to Western Europe as a component of their aquaculture feed for the past how many years? I think 5 years now. But we depend so much on gathering. There is no aquaculture or nor cultivation yet. Even in France, the Olmix group, they are into really, and even in Norway, they are. Everybody is doing a lot of researches on ulva, which is both common to tropical as well as in the temperate. And another one is the porphyra or the neopyropia, which is our nori here in Southeast Asia or in the Asia Pacific. It is now being used also in the northeast of America, USA, and even now in some Western Europe. So there are now a lot of common seaweeds in the Asia Pacific and also in the Western countries, wherein there is commonality now, because we are looking into this kind of seaweeds as very good sources, not only for food, but also for nutraceuticals and also pharmaceuticals. So those seaweeds, I would say that there is the future of collaboration between the Asia Pacific seaweed scientists and also to our counterparts in Western Europe and America.
That's really fascinating that there's so much overlap now in such different types of environments and waters. Fascinating. Dr. Lim, back to you. I'm curious to know if you've seen families and communities being affected by this growing seaweed market and industry in Malaysia.
So for Malaysia, actually, when we talk about the cultivation of seaweeds, is actually majority are actually based on family based. So it's more like a community. So according to the statistic that we know, there is about 1,000, it offer about 1,000 occupants to the local community, the farmer that are involved in cultivation. So in general, it's more like a family activity, because in terms of Kappa ficus eucuma, it doesn't involve high technology things. So normally the man in the family will go out and do the outplanting in the sea, or the wife and even the children will be helping to tying the seaweeds, because they will tie to the rope pure before outplanting, because the system that we use in Malaysia is a long line system. So that is how they divided the job. Yeah.
So you said the men go out and then the women and sometimes children. And is that a full-time?
Not a full-time, especially for the housewife and the children, because you only need to do it seasonally when you are out planting, and also probably when they are harvesting. So the wife and the children will help to untie and take off the seaweed, and also doing the drying process, because normally they are staying close by as a still house. So in the open sea, there will be a platform for them to dry the seaweeds. So they normally depend on natural sunlight to dry the seaweed.
And Dr. Hurtado, back to you. How active are women in seaweed cultivation in the Philippines?
Oh, it's active because as Dr. Fickham said that it is a family base.
Mhm.
So we have, I have seen that it's not only in papers now wherein there are certain roles for the men and the women, especially if you are only a housewife and you're now I'm speaking of the southern Philippines, wherein it is the major source of seaweed production in the Philippines. So you can see that it's a full-time source of livelihood there. So the husband will harvest, bring it to the platform of their stilt houses, and then the women will select, tie, and give it to the husband again. And after a day, it will plant again to the sea. So it become vicious cycle, something like that. And the children do help also in the whole family business. So the female or the women, they also do some trading. If the husband is so busy in the sea, and if the seaweed is already dried, then the wife or the women will carry their sacks of dried seaweed to the town, and then of course after selling it to the traders or even to directly to the processors, then it's time for them to go for marketing for the family needs. So it's really they have their own roles. And in Sitankal, there is a report that there is equality of the role between the husband and the women. Because if you see the type of houses of seaweed farmers in the south, they live not on lands at the middle of the sea. So they are really contained. There are captive audience there already. There are captive audience. So everything, their would say that the waking time is really focused on seaweed, from planting, tying, and then installing, cleaning, harvesting, drying. So it's really their life. It's really their life there. If you say that it's more than 8 hours a day being focused to seaweed farming, you cannot deny it. So there is a big role of the women. Sometimes the women has the capacity to even bargain, because bargain for the pricing, or even for financial loans, like that. Because women, if I may say, that we are more affable in talking. So we can easily convince the head of a financial institution. So those are the roles they play. And aside from being a household mother, it's a multiple role for a mother, for a seaweed a family there in southern Philippines, because I have been working with them since the start of my career in the late 90s to the present. So I work with them, I eat with them, so practically I know their A to Z.
Yeah.
A
So
to Z.
it really is an empowering position for these women to be in.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes if they have already some what you call, they have more or less a stable source of income, their status in the community is leveling up. It's leveling up. Sometimes they become um members of the barangay, which is the smallest unit of government in the Philippines, something like that. So they are leveling up to their status financially, that is economically speaking also. I have been preaching that seaweed farming in the Philippines is really a very good a kind of livelihood, especially among the coastal people. We have been farming since 1970 to the present.
Mhm.
Even after how many typhoons in the Philippines, we are still here. It only proves that we, the Filipinos, are resilient.
Yeah.
We go down and then we rise up again. And here we are, despite the pandemic,
Mhm.
the seaweed farming still stand there, even though at a lesser volume of production.
Mm. Mhm.
And that is understandable because it's global.
Yeah.
Our pandemic is global.
And so speaking of resilience, I'm very curious, and Dr. Lim, I'll ask you this first. I'm curious about how the changing climate is affecting seaweed farming and how the communities are responding to those changes.
Okay, so if we talk about climate change, I think is there are a few aspects that we have to look into, because normally when we do a outplanting of seaweeds, because in the old day it's quite consistent between the wet and dry seasons, but because of the climate change that actually affect the cycles, and even sometimes it's very hard to predict when it's dry season, when it's wet season. So it will somehow actually affect in terms of the productivity. So, and then I think for tropical area that we have a season of El Nino, that when there is a sudden surge as regards about the temperature increase, so that is also affecting the growth, the productivity of the seaweed. So in this regards, I think is because the climate change is there, but the thing is there is still lack of information of how much the impact, because it's going to be, I think in the long term you will see that. But the thing is, I think there is always a need for us to take a precaution measure, or actually take a preventive measurement, that what should we do if in case climate change will take place. Will our existing species that we are cultivating can resist in terms of the temperature increase, in terms of salinity because of the sea level rise? So there are areas that might be affected by the salinity, as well as ocean acidification. So, but at regard about tropical at this stage, I think temperature increase are more obvious. So, I mean, for my team, we are using laboratory approach in trying to find the species or the strain of Kappa ficus that may resist to high temperature. So we are looking into that. So we know that if temperature beyond 32 and beyond, the seaweed will start to experience stress. Yeah. So this is at the moment we are doing the research, and we hope that we are eventually will be able to find out what are the strain that is suitable in case of warming will continue.
How long does it take to figure out which strains, what strain? I mean, is that a 2-year process? Is that a 6-month process?
I think is ongoing. So at the moment, we do have a preliminary result in comparing the 3 main species of Kappa ficus they are cultivating in Malaysia. We actually have 3 species, which is Avalarasia, Striatus, and Malaysianus. So out of the 3, we found that Kappa ficus, Avalarasia, and Striatus are actually more resistant in terms of seaweeds. And in terms, we also look into the productivity in terms of the gel strength and carrageenan. So these are the 2. So we are in the process of writing out the paper. We are hoping to get a much more longer study. Yeah.
Okay. And Dr. Hurtado, what are you seeing in the communities you work with in regards to climate change?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Dr. Phaik-Eem said, that at first we are still doing it on the lab scale. So until such time that actually the University of the Philippines Visayas has started also about this resilience on the tolerance of the seaweed to higher temperature and other environmental parameters. And yeah, we cannot get a very stable result or very good results in 1 year time, 2 years time, probably it will take some time, 3 years at the most, that we can possibly be able to get a bullseye of what really a species is really resilient. But nowadays, what our seaweed farmers are doing to really get away a bit from this climate change or the rise of temperature in the seawater is that they go deeper in the farming, and they instead that they came from the shallow waters wherein the seaweed are still at the surface, and now they are going down a bit lower from the water surface, since as you go down, as you go deeper into the depth of the sea, the temperature decreases, which is lower. So those are the mitigating measures the seaweed farmers are doing, and they are doing it by themselves. But sometimes I have to caution them also on science, so that more or less they will have a very good and convincing results. So in our global seaweed star project, we were able to identify some wild population yet of Capophycus that are not yet tested. Who knows? Those seaweeds which are taken from the wild, when brought and tested in the lab for sporulation or even for tissue culture, they are more resilient to higher temperatures and even higher salinity, or should I say extremes, because high and low will always affect the physiological activities of the seaweed. So those are the things running on my head, but hopefully somebody will pick it up. I'm now advising the younger generation seaweed scientists here, researchers here in the Philippines, especially here in Visayas, that I help them organize their thoughts, their proposals in such a way that it will lead something else more positive in response to mitigating the effect or the adverse effect of climate change insofar as seaweed farming is concerned, be it any species of seaweed for that matter.
Right. Well, that's an incredibly important role. I mean, to have a mentor of your prestige is very helpful for them, and I'm sure will pay off in the long run. So that's a wonderful role as well. So as a final wrap up, I'm curious what makes each of you optimistic about the future of seaweed farming. And Dr. Lim, why don't you start?
I think seaweed is something that is, I would say that is very promising in terms of future, because firstly it have a wide applications. You can use as a source of food, industry, pharmaceuticals, cosmeceutical, nutraceuticals. It have a lot of application. Another thing is, with the increase of population of the world, competition of the land use and things like that, ocean is where we should explore. And thirdly is because seaweeds is beneficial to the environment, because they are actually actively carry out photosynthesis, and they can be a good way of removing CO2. So it will help to balance the ecosystem, the ecology system in the ocean. And of course, we have the passion to continue to see and believe that seaweed will bring benefit. Yeah, and it's a good alternative. It's not, eventually, I think it's not only alternative food, but it will be part of our daily food that everybody should consume. Yeah.
It's so broad in its application. Every time I open a plastic bag, I keep thinking, oh, I wish we were further along and that this bag were made of seaweed. Dr. Hurtado, how about you?
Considering that the Philippines is an archipelagic country made up of 7,100 islands, I would say in all honesty that we should explore, and tap all the marine resources. And what else can we tap if not the seaweeds? And as Dr. Phaik-Eem said a while ago, that you can say everything from morning to evening, from your waking time to your sleeping time, you are using a part of a seaweed. Not only exactly. So only few probably will realize that statement, but it's a fact. The moment you wake up until your sleeping time, you are using part and parcel of seaweed. So along that line, then we have to really harness our passion for seaweed in the exploration, in tapping, making use of all the resources to the maximum for the benefit of the whole population. Remember that we are not decreasing in the numbers of people, but we keep on increasing and increasing. So where will you get all the resources that will feed this population in the next how many decades, if not the sea? And one of the important marine resources is the seaweed.
Bravo. I love your passion. Thank you so much.
That's my passion ever since when I was young, seaweeds, because I came from a coastal town up there in the north of Luzon. I'm not from this place.
We both
I'm
grew
not
in
there.
the
Oh, you
In
did?
another,
coastal.
yeah.
I'm born in an island,
Oh,
Langkawi Island.
Yeah, if I will tell you, Felicity, at early age, whenever I go to the sea,
yeah.
I collect seaweeds and I bring them to the market and sell them
Oh my goodness.
at early age. So that
Wow.
gave me the passion. So when I was in college, when I was studying taxonomy of seaweeds, wow, this gave me the idea again to pursue further this love of seaweed. And until such time, my first masteral, second masteral, until my doctorate, they're all seaweed.
You've been able to pursue your passion and your love and from such a young age, and that it's this incredibly important thread throughout your life. It's so beautiful. Ladies, thank you so much. Thank you for being with us today and for taking the time and bringing your passion to all of our viewers at AlgaePlanet.com. We so appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you too. Thank you too for giving us the opportunity to share our passion for seaweeds.
We'd also like to thank our friends Ewan Patterson and Dr. Elizabeth Cottier Cook at the Scottish Association for Marine Science in Oban, Scotland, for introducing us to Dr. Lim and Dr. Hurtado. Thank you.